Where were you when the world stopped turning that September day out in the yard?
I was at my house in Wichita, Kansas. I remember coming home on the school bus in 4th grade and everyone was freaking out because their parents had all called them and wanted to make sure that they were okay and didn't want everyone to freak out. And then when I got home, my parents, who are both in the Army National Guard, were home when I got there, which was really unusual, and explained to me that they had been called up to do airport security in Wichita just to make sure everything was okay.
I just remember waking up that morning and it was on the news and I wanted to stay and watch and see what was going on because, you know, I just remember the buildings crumbling. My parents made me get on the bus and I was kind of, you know, ticked at them for not letting me stay and watch it, and then no one would tell us what was going on at school. I guess I wasn't really too terribly impacted. I was just kind of confused, and then when I did realize what was going on, I think, you know, I was 11 and I really didn't realize it as much as I could have. I wanted to, you know, feel a lot of shock, but I'm just like, no, that couldn't have happened.
I don't remember much, I wasn't very old, but I do remember like I was in class and they came in and we all went into this small room and watched it on a small television and everybody was like, oh my gosh, you know, but I didn't really like comprehend like what was going on. I was not very old at all.
We were all sitting there around like this little TV is like this big, just watching it, and I was so confused as like to what was going on, like I didn't even comprehend it. And just, I don't know, it didn't really hit me until like the previous years, like once I started getting older and understanding like what happened.
I remember being in the 6th grade in Miss Olson's geography class, social sciences. Anyways, and I remember we were watching it on our like Channel 1 TV and we were all freaked out and I was like scared that I was gonna die or something bad was gonna happen. So I went home and me and my mom sat on the bed and we watched the footage and stuff, and I was scared, and every time I hear a plane now I get really scared. But it was a sad day, and I remember being really sad and being really scared because I wasn't sure what was going to go down.
I was on my way to school when 9/11 happened, and I watched it the entire day with my 5th grade teachers. I feel like at 10 years old you don't really know how to understand what's going on, but over the years you kind of piece together that information, have pride in the fact that people responded so well, and feel sadness for the many people affected by 9/11.
I woke up, about to eat my cereal and then turn on the TV. The first plane just hit the first tower. I have a smoke come out a little bit here. The announcer said something about, oh, maybe the pilot kind of a little, not quite, you know, right, and they hit the building. And then I came to school. The second plane hit, and not so long after that, Carrie came in and told me that another plane just hit the Pentagon and the whole world just...
I was in a high school principal position in Johnson, Kansas, and I had a sales representative from a company come into my office to meet with me, and he had just been driving in the car and he'd heard on the radio something about the attack. So we had a TV in my office, turned that on, and of course they were showing the devastation from the first crash that had hit the first tower, and we actually watched as the second plane hit the second tower, and it was totally unbelievable.
I specifically remember that was the only day that was one of the only days that fall that my mom was going to let my brother and I walk to school. She was going to walk with us, and as soon as we were leaving the house, we heard about it, and we sat on the living room floor and watched the TV, and I remember going into my 4th grade class later that afternoon, and we had a prayer circle, and everybody had something to say. It was really emotional, and it was just really intense because everybody had been affected by it in some way, whether it was just emotional being from a distance, or they knew somebody, or they knew somebody who knew somebody, and it was something I've never experienced before.
I remember this girl on the bus telling me her dad was hurt, and then our teacher told us about the Twin Towers falling, and then the girl next to me, her dad was in there, and she started crying because she got a note from her mom saying her dad had died. Well, as a 5th grade, I didn't really know exactly what was going on until I went home, but watching the clips, I was really mad and sad, and cried a lot. I don't know why, but I cried.
I don't really, everyone was really sad. Everyone was quiet the majority of the day. I remember Mrs. Hatch saying that our classes were pretty much going to be canceled just for, in remembrance of what was going on. And I remember we watched part of a video on it a couple of days later, and we were all just, horrified by it.
I was in my 4th grade Miss Fritz's class at Tonganoxie High School, and I remember she let us listen to the radio, and it talked about it, and we really didn't know what was going on because I don't think we could grasp what was happening, because I don't think any of us knew what the World Trade Center was and how much it would affect our economy and our government and the whole United States.
On 9/11, I was in Wichita, Kansas with the governor. We were hosting the Japanese U.S. Midwest Trade Conference. Well, I remember getting up and watching the Today Show, and I actually saw the second plane fly into the building because they had it online. I then went downstairs from my hotel room to the meeting and ran into the governor. He was leaving to get in his plane to fly back because they were closing the airspace and he wasn't going to be able to fly back to Topeka unless he got in the air right away. And he was also we had the ambassador of Japan as well as the U.S. ambassador of Japan there, and he was taking them back to Topeka with him because they weren't going to be able to go home. I just didn't believe I was seeing what actually happened, and I was totally dismayed by it. At first I thought it was an accident, as most people did when the first plane hit. They didn't know how big the plane was, and they just thought some small plane or something had flown into the building. But to actually see it and then be able to replay it over and over again, that second plane, it was obvious it was intentional. And by then they knew there was an organized attempt because the Pentagon was hit shortly after that.
I was working here in the Union, and we actually pulled a TV camera up to our office and hooked into whatever news coverage it was and watched.
I remember it was my first year working as a professional in student activities, and I was working at Pittsburgh State, so here in Kansas, just the other side of the state. And I remember being home watching the Today Show as I was getting ready for work when they interrupted live about the first plane hitting a tower. And I thought, oh, who knows what's happening, I better get into work, because we'd worked late the night before, so we were all told to come in later that next morning. And I get there, and the campus, kind of like the coffee shop area, similar to Cody Commons, had several televisions, and it was just packed with students. It was on the Today Show, CNN, Headline News, and it was this weird sense of disbelief, but community as well, that everyone had just come together. You know, we were still in classes, everything was still happening, but it seemed like everyone on campus was in the building watching television and trying to figure out what was happening, but just that sense of being there for each other was really powerful.
A student came in, he was a known practical joker, and he said, the Pentagon's on fire. And Brandon went, oh, whatever. And he's like, no, turn on the TV, turn on the TV. He finally convinced the teacher to turn on the TV, and we didn't know anything had hit the Twin Towers yet. We just knew about the Pentagon. Saw the fire, and just as we turned on the TV a few minutes later, the plane slammed into the second tower. And I was in Michigan, and a small town, and the whole time we were thinking, you know, what is it? Is it war? You know, who's doing this? Is it an accident? You know, scared. Even then, it was pretty wild. We were surprised that they didn't cancel school. You know, we were like, hey, we didn't know what's going on. But we watched the TVs all day. Nothing productive was done. But it was pretty scary. I remember exactly how it was. Nothing ever like it.
On 9/11, I was in my 4th grade speech class. I was about to graduate, and they came in and said something bad had happened, and I went back to my regular class, and we had like a circle time about it. But 4th graders don't really understand the impact of that, like when you're so little. But looking back now, I think my school did a really good job of like getting us together and making everyone feel safe, even though something so bad was happening.
I was in my 3rd grade classroom. I was at a Christian school, but I didn't really understand what was going on. All I knew was like at 9 o'clock my teacher said like something bad had really happened. But we were all going home really early, and then my mom was super freaked out.
I remember a lot of kids crying. At the time the teachers wouldn't tell us why, what happened or what was going on. Whatever, people was leaving school, and then later on we figure out what happened. By the time you get out of, I got out of my high school, you could see the smoke and whatever, because I'm from New York. You could see the smokes all in the air, all the highways was closed, and we didn't really understand how serious it was until later that day, probably in the evening, but that's a little bit I can remember.
I don't really remember too much. I just remember the news going crazy, you know, and every channel had it on. I mean, like I said, I wasn't really in the area, so there wasn't too much going on where I was. But we definitely knew about it as soon as it happened.
One of my friend's parents was in tower, the second tower that dropped, and I didn't know that until probably like 4 or 5 o'clock that day, that she had just lost her mother or whatever. She was one of the kids that was crying.
One of my friends that I was going to school with at that time, he actually had his dad worked in the Pentagon and had a dentist appointment the very morning that happened, and his office was in the very part of the wing that was hit by the airplane. So if he hadn't had that dentist appointment that morning, he probably would have died. So there were some people that I knew who had a direct impact as a result of those attacks. So it was a pretty sobering day.
I was getting ready to teach one of my first undergraduate courses as a grad student, and I was at home, and my son had just returned from New York City 3 days earlier, and he lived in Manhattan and used to take, I don't know if it's called a train or subway or whatever, but went right under the World Trade Center, and he did that every day. So I watched with my husband, who had been there several times, and my kids.
I was in 2nd grade, and I remember showing up to class and my teacher being really upset, and they rolled a bunch of TVs into all the classrooms, and we were all watching the news, and a girl in my class was even more upset than everyone else. She was just really worried that she had family there in New York and somebody had gotten hurt.
I was in my French class, and I just remember hearing about it and everybody just being worried, and then our school took like a moment of silence and we all pretty much turned on the TVs to see what was happening.
It was a pretty somber and saddening feeling throughout the entire school, and then even when I got home, my parents were really upset and crying.
Did you look up to heaven for some